Yes, Mr. Hodge.
Commissioner, the next witness is Brendan Stanford. I call Mr. Stanford.
Yes. You go into the witness box, Mr. Stanford, and can I ask you whether you would prefer to make an oath or take an affirmation?
I have an oath, thanks, Commissioner.
Yes. Swear the witness, please.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence that I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Do sit down.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Hodge.
Thank you, Commissioner. Your name is Brendan John Stanford,
That's correct.
and you reside in an address that you've given to the Royal Commission.
That's correct.
And do you currently work as a hospitality contractor?
I am. I'm a hospitality contractor. I've been off work for a period of time, though, just with illness, but that's my known job.
Right. And you received a summons to attend to give evidence before the Royal Commission?
That's correct.
Do you have a copy of that, or do you have that summons there?
I do.
Thank you. I tender the summons, Commissioner.
Exhibit 3.105 will be the summons.
And Mr. Stanford, you've made a statement for the Royal Commission dated the 24th of May 2018,
I have.
and you've read through that statement.
I have.
And are the contents of the statement true and correct?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Thank you. I tender the statement, Commissioner,
Exhibit
together with the exhibits.
Exhibit 3.106 will be the statement and exhibits of Mr. Stanford.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Stanford, I want to just take you through a series of events. We're going to start before the relevant hotel and begin in 2005. In 2005, you and your brother were working as the owners and licensees of a pub, is that right?
That's correct.
And where was the pub?
In the Hunter Valley, New South Wales.
Right. And did you own it together?
No, I owned it in partnership with my wife at the time.
And what was your brother's role in it?
He was manager, basically, general manager,
And how long had you held the pub for?
since 2001.
Right. And before you'd bought the pub, you'd been working as an officer of the Australian Federal Police?
That's correct.
And how long had you been a
Since
AFP officer for?
1991.
Right. And then once you bought the pub, were you working in the pub? The Cessnock pub?
Yes, yes.
Right. And your brother was also working in the pub from some point in time?
He joined me at the hotel in early 2003.
Okay. And what had he been doing before he came to the pub?
He worked with the CSIRO down here in Melbourne.
And was the pub profitable?
Very.
All right. But you'd sold it?
Sold it, yes.
And why did you want to sell it?
At that time, I thought we'd been there long enough. It's a very full-on commitment, 7 days a week and not many days off, long hours, running basically, a hands-on operation. 4 to 5 years, I think, would bring just about anyone unstuck unless you step back and just take an overseeing role. But I was very hands-on with what happened, and I thought it was time for a break and to move on.
And after you sold that pub, were you looking to buy another pub?
Not immediately, no.
All right. But you did eventually buy another pub?
I did.
And how did that come about?
We just sort of always had a look in the marketplace to see what was around. We sort of had a bit of criteria about how far we wanted to be from the major centres. Doesn't matter where it was, what major centre, but just, with good industry around. So unemployment, possibly a growth area as well. So just the normal sort of due diligence you'd look at to know that the area was going to sustain you going into business and it'd be profitable in the long run.
And when you say we, does that mean you and your brother?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. And eventually you found the Coronation Hotel in Portland?
That's correct.
And how did you become aware of that hotel?
Oh, I just saw it advertised. We looked at a number of others, but we saw this advertised. It seemed to be a good performer on on the figures that we saw initially. We did we visited the hotel at different times as well, and understand what they were doing there, and just to make sure that the trade that was happening was backed up by the figures that they were displaying.
When you say the figures they were displaying, you were provided with access to the books for the pub?
Yeah, the broker gives you a certain snapshot of what's actually going on.
And was it a profitable business?
It seemingly was a profitable business.
All right. And you ended up buying the hotel, is that right?
We did.
All right. And that was in 2006?
That's correct.
And who were the buyers of the hotel?
Myself and my brother.
All right. So you, as individuals, you bought it?
Yeah, the land and building, we set it up, a company to run the business, and land and buildings as a partnership.
The two of you who owned it?
That's correct.
And did you need a loan to buy it?
We did.
How much was the purchase price? Can you recall?
They were asking 1.75, and we negotiated 1.6 million.
All right. And you applied for a loan from BankWest?
That's correct.
And how much did you apply for from BankWest?
We applied for 1.2 million, which was the maximum LVR I think that they was sort of offering at that stage. So.
And how did you fund the difference?
Personal savings or own cash.
And BankWest gave you a loan over the property?
That's correct.
And was there a valuation that was done of the property?
There was a valuation done.
And who prepared the valuation?
Robertson and Robertson, panel valuers for the bank.
And what was it valued at?
At 1.6 million.
The price you were paying for it?
That's correct.
And BankWest offered to lend you the $1.2 million?
That's correct.
And can you recall what the security was that you provided for the loan?
The hotel, basically.
And do you remember whether there was also some security granted by the company that was going to run the business?
Yes, it was. The company provided security as well.
Right. And was the company called Let It Rain Proprietary Limited?
That's correct.
Right. But the business loan itself was taken out in you and your brother's names?
That's correct.
And just so the commissioners can get some sense of the structure of the business, what was the reason for incorporating Let It Rain?
It's just over time, if you ever want to lease the business, that was just a structure that seemed to work, where you could own the freehold, and actually a new entity could come in over the top as a lessee. Should you want to go that way, it's just a general structure that sort of worked with hotels, and it was a long-term sort of strategy for us with the hotel. We were going to be there for a long term.
And how long was the loan for?
20 years.
And was it a interest-only loan?
No.
What were the nature of the payments you were making?
Well, it's principal and interest.
And do you recall at some point in time your loan was split into a fixed interest and variable interest part?
I do. That was possibly not too long after we'd gone into the hotel, maybe 2007, 2008.
Right. And the company in Let It Rain, which is running the business, were you a director of the company?
No, I wasn't.
Were you a shareholder of the
Yeah,
company?
I was a shareholder.
And after you bought the pub, who was operating it on a day-to-day basis?
For the first 15, 16 months, we both did. While we set everything up and our structures and internal and training and everything else, and understood how the business had functioned. So basically I was there till the end of 2007, and my brother assumed responsibility of running the pub after that.
Okay. And you went to work in another job, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And when you started operating the business, how was it running? How was it performing?
Virtually in line with the figures that we were provided. I noticed that in the first 12 months we'd sort of turnover had been up around 10% on what we'd initially seen, so positive.
Right. Now, over time, the performance dipped off?
Yeah, not in the first number of years. I think around first half of financial year 11, so towards the end of 2010, that's when it was a bit noticeable that, there's a lot of other factors in the marketplace that were causing concern, and I don't think it was an unusual set of circumstances to see a downturn.
And at that stage, late 2010, early 2011, what was your brother's role in the business?
Yeah, he was still running the business as a manager.
And what was your role in the business by that stage?
I just helped out and whenever. So I actually had a job in Bathurst from 2010, so I sort of travelled in between the hotel and Bathurst and where I was living at the time. And I just, we spoke virtually daily about how things were going and what we needed to do, and I just helped out where I could. So whatever was required, I'd just pitch in.
Who was responsible for the financial accounts of the business?
Overall, Michael was, because he was there the whole time. But as I said, when I came in, I'd just look at where things are at and what creditors needed paying, and we just talked about what we're going to do and how we're going to arrange the turnover for the week, and just the normal discussions you'd have around finances as in any business.
And did the business have accountants?
We did, yes.
Throughout the whole period?
Yes.
Right. I think at some point you changed accountants, is that right?
Yeah, we did after in 2011.
Right. We'll come to that in a moment. So the licensee of the hotel throughout this time was whom?
My brother, Michael.
Okay. And in 2009, BankWest asked for the hotel to be revalued?
That's correct.
And that was consistent with what was required under the loan, which is a valuation every 3 years?
3 years, yeah, that's correct.
And did you arrange for a valuation to be done?
We spoke to the valuer and arranged, a rate, and in that time in a period, like we had to make sure that they can do it. But BankWest commissioned the valuation.
Right. And did you see that valuation at the time?
Yes, I did.
And can you recall, we don't need to guess, we'll bring it up, it's CBA.001.0285.0567. CBA.0001.0285.0567. It's Exhibit 2, Mr. Stanford's statement. So this is the valuation dated the 30th of October 2009?
Yes.
That's right? Mr.
Yes.
And you see it's instructed by Mr. Gary Goldsmith. He was the relationship manager that you were dealing with at the time from BankWest?
That's correct.
And if we go to the page .0571, you see the valuation as at 30 October 2009 was $1.55 million.
Yes.
And you understand that one of the ways in which the business is valued is by capitalising the maintainable net profit of the business.
I do.
And so as the profit falls, depending on what the capitalisation rate does, you would expect that the value of the whole enterprise would fall.
Depending on market conditions, yes.
Right. And you referred to what then happened in 2010 in terms of trading, and you said there was a decrease in performance of the business.
Yeah, towards I think the end of the December half of 2010, it was fairly common knowledge that the flow-on effects for the GFC. I think that also there was the smoking changes in hotels had sort of run its full course, and so there was changes as far as that you couldn't smoke in the venues as well. So yeah, there was plenty happening, in the industry as far as reasons for a downturn in trade, I'd say.
And in 2010, do you know whether the business or whether you and your brother were maintaining your principal and interest payments?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
But one thing that did happen was that you, or at least Let It Rain, fell behind on commitments to the ATO.
That's correct.
And are you aware of what was done to try to redress that?
Yeah, we contacted the ATO and just formalised a payment plan to rectify that shortfall.
And do you know whether you made payments in accordance with the payment plan?
Yeah, I believe so.
Now, do you recall that the business applied for an overdraft facility?
Yes, I do.
And can you remember what the reason for that was?
Around the same time,
Just around the same time, you mean in 2010? Is that
yeah,
right?
in 2010, yeah, we always operated like on a continuous improvement for the hotel. Like they're old establishments, there's always things you can do to keep the look and the feel of the place in the way it was. We had shops associated with it as well, so lettable businesses that for shops that were part of the premises, and so we spent money on doing them up so we could have tenants in them. We set up a function room. We had a separate entrance to the function room through the hotel. We actually put holes in the walls and a walkway through so we could have separate space to have bigger events. We increased the floor size in the hotel as well. We took out an airlock, and just so it was just like I said, a continual sort of arrangement that we had. Plus the fact that things had there was identified slowing down. We just didn't want to be caught in a place where you couldn't meet your commitments.
And do you know how much the overdraft was for?
$20,000.
Okay. And that was something you sought then in 2010, is that right?
Yeah, well, we'd actually asked previously to go interest only for a period, but that wasn't an option, as explained by our relationship manager.
Okay. And you were, though, given the $20,000 overdraft?
We were.
And in terms of the operation of that overdraft, at some point that became overdrawn. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And do you remember why that was?
Not 100%. I'd only be speculating, but the way things work with BankWest, we didn't have a branch close by, so our closest branch was Orange. So we'd have our FPOS system set up that our payments through FPOS went directly into that account, so we'd always had funds going in. So in line with the slowdown of the business in that period, there'd be less going into that account, and that'd be what I'd say is why it became overdrawn.
Do you recall in 2010 a discussion with Mr. Goldsmith about signing a new document or a new loan document?
Yes, I do.
All right, and can you tell us what you can remember about that?
I remember I was obviously working in Bathurst at the time, as I mentioned, and we'd gone across and he'd arranged for a lunch to meet at one of the other establishments in Bathurst, and it was explained that the facility that we had was no longer available, and it needed to change, and we thought, I thought that it sounded reasonable under, the explanation from Mr. Goldsmith.
Can you remember what changes you understood would happen as a result of the new document?
The only thing that really stands out to me was the fact that our reporting would change. So where it was annually before, it would go to quarterly.
And you knew that at the time you were signing the document?
Yes, we did. That was basically explained by Mr. Goldsmith to us.
All right. Do you remember any change to your interest rate at about that time?
I don't.
Okay. And you signed the document to change the loan over?
We did.
Right. And that didn't change the term of the loans?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay. But it did introduce, as you understood it, this reporting covenant.
That's correct.
And that required you to provide quarterly reports.
Quarterly reports.
And do you know whether that obligation was being met after it was signed?
In the first instance, no. I think it's one of those things that it takes a bit, where you're providing your information to your accountant once a year to do it quarterly. It's, new systems have to be implemented, and that didn't happen straight away. So,
do you recall that before you signed this document under the old loan agreement, that you had other reporting requirements you had to meet?
We'd get a letter, I think, annually from our representative from Dubbo, and that sort of set out what we need to do. So that's as simple as it was.
And do you recall there was sometimes some difficulty in meeting those annual obligations?
Yeah, well, it's a very busy time of the year for accountants, so a lot of the time we, rely on, their peaks and troughs as far as things go. So we can ask for it as quickly as we can, but sometimes it just doesn't come. And
after the new loan agreement was made with the quarterly reporting obligations, I think you've explained you had an issue, or you weren't always meeting those obligations. Is
yes,
that right?
That happened in the first instance.
And in fact, you didn't manage to provide it on time the very first time it was due after you signed the agreement?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you received a letter from the bank?
Yes, we did.
And perhaps if we just bring up one of those, Exhibit 3 CBA.0001.0285.1231. Sorry, 1231, not 1281. CBA.0001.0285.1231. So this is the first notification of breach you received after having failed to provide the quarterly reports, and that's on the 30th of November 2010?
That's correct.
Now, it says that there's a breach fee of $250, but also that that's waived in this instance. Is that right?
That's what it says, yes.
And you don't remember having been charged $250?
No, I don't.
Okay. Was this, or do you remember receiving this letter at the time?
Not personally, not exactly that I can say that. I know that it was a discussion around the breaches, but not exactly receiving that letter.
Do you recall your brother talking to you about what dealings he was having with BankWest?
Yes.
All right. Do you recall what he had said to you about what he understood BankWest's attitude to be to the business?
At the time, there was nothing that would have given any other indication that it was business as usual. Even when we transferred from Dubbo to Orange, that was the quote from our relationship manager, our business manager from Dubbo, was it's going to be business as usual once your account goes across to Orange.
All right. Can you recall at some stage your brother Michael becoming suspicious about whether the BankWest wanted to sell the business?
From the outset, when we had the meeting in Bathurst, he's said to me a number of times over the years in relation to that meeting that he wasn't comfortable with how things transpired that day, with the meeting with Gary Goldsmith. So there was suspicions obviously there.
From him, you mean?
From him.
But not from you?
No.
Okay. And the meeting in Bathurst, do you remember what year that was?
In 2010.
Okay. Now, there was then another type of breach letter that you received. Can we bring up Exhibit 7, CBA.0001.0285.1278? So this is a letter received on the 8th of April 2011.
Yep.
Can you recall receiving this at the time?
No, I don't.
Okay. You understand there are two types of breaches being identified here. One is failing to maintain an ICR ratio. The other is failing to maintain a DSR ratio.
Yes.
Do you understand what that means?
Yeah, I do.
All right. So if we start with ICR, could you just explain what that means and what you're required to do?
Well, it's basically your EBITDA divided by your interest, and that's my understanding. So
your EBITDA has to be more than 2 times the
more than
interest
2
payments.
times, yeah.
And DSR, do you understand what that is?
No, not exactly.
Okay. And do you recall what happened after this letter was received?
No.
Okay. Do you know whether by April of 2011 you and your brother were still making your principal and interest payments?
No, I don't.
Do you know whether you were still making your payments to the ATO?
Yeah, my assumption is yes, we would be, because as far as I'm aware, we never faltered from the payment schedule.
All right. Do you remember whether, as at the beginning of 2011, you and your brother were contemplating selling the hotel?
We'd had discussions in regards to it, similar to a previous hotel. I thought, 4 to 5 years in a place was a time for a break. It's energy, it's focus, it's marketing, it's changing the way you're going to do things. Everything about it, it needs to be invigorated again, and you've got to work out whether you've got those energy levels or you can see enough blue sky to actually continue on, in the same vein. So we definitely had a discussion around it.
And what did you decide to do?
Michael wanted to stay.
He wanted to stay.
He wanted to stay.
Right. And I may have asked half of this question at the beginning of your examination, but you were borrowing money for 20 years. How did you foresee this investment in the pub turning out?
As I stated before, it was a long-term play for me. As far as I was concerned, we'd get to a point where we could comfortably lease it out and use those funds to pay off the rest of the facility that we had. That was probably the ideal plan. If the market was strong enough, again, you'd contemplate selling as well. It's very cyclical. Like, I've seen the ups and downs over 20 odd years with it, and that for every down there's the ups as well. So it's just how you can deal with those downs.
Now, you know that in the second half of 2011, BankWest appointed PPB Advisory to perform a function as investigative accountants.
Yeah, prior to them turning up at the hotel, no, I didn't know that they'd...
No, sorry, let me break it down. At the moment, you know now that they appointed somebody to go and be investigative accountants.
Yes.
And I think you were then talking about when you first found out that they'd appointed somebody to do that, is that right?
Yeah.
And when did you first find out that they'd appointed investigative accountants?
When my brother rang me to tell me that they just showed up at the hotel.
And what did you understand they were there to do?
A report for the bank.
On how the hotel was going?
A report for the bank.
And
there was no mention of an investigative report or anything of that nature.
so you just knew that PPB Advisory had turned up at the hotel, is that what you mean? And then were you subsequently told that they'd prepared a report?
Not until we were made aware that down the track that there was a problem.
Yes, but you know that at some point in time they told...
They were preparing a report for the bank.
Yes.
Yes.
After they'd gone away, is that right?
Yeah.
And did they ever speak to you?
No.
And at that time then, the person who was responsible for managing the business though was your brother?
That's correct.
And what sort of role were you playing then in 2011?
It's just similar to before. I'd be there every second week and we'd discuss, where things are at, how we were tracking in regards to, different ways we saw opportunity to increase revenue. As I said, we had we had changeover in some of the tenants in the in our shop fronts that we had. We had approaches from employment agency in Lithgow to utilise the space as well within our shops. We were doing a refurbishment of our accommodation rooms upstairs. So we after the financial 2011, we went a lot harder with entertainment and all that sort of stuff to bring people into the hotel. So we had a fair few irons in the fire in trying to rectify the situation from the end of financial year 11.
If you just go back to that point in time when your brother called you to tell you that PPB Advisory were at the hotel, did the two of you have a discussion about what that meant, what the significance of that was?
The suspicions, I guess, from Michael's point of view, were raised again in relation to what was going on with the bank, but there was no wording or anything that was said in that scenario that would have raised a flag that there was an issue forthcoming.
Now then, if we go to Exhibit 8 to your statement, which is CBA.0002.1973.7265. So this is a letter sent to you dated the 3rd of November 2011,
That's correct.
and it's from Gaydon's lawyers,
That's correct.
and they were the lawyers acting for BankWest.
Yes.
All right. You see it refers to our letter of the 15th of August 2011.
Yes.
You're not sure what that is?
No.
Okay. And it explains, we go over the page to .7266. At the top of the page that BankWest has received an independent investigative accountant's report into the trading position of the hotel.
Yes.
And as a result of reviewing the report, BankWest is concerned that a change has occurred in the business's financial condition,
Yes.
and you were required within 7 days to say whether you were prepared to acknowledge that there had been a material adverse change in the financial condition of the hotel.
Yes.
And if you weren't prepared to do that, to outline the reasons why, in your opinion, there had not been a material adverse change, and
Yes.
provide financial records to support your position.
Yes.
Now, had you received a copy of the independent accountant's report?
No, we haven't.
Did you ever receive a copy of the independent accountant's report?
No, I didn't receive a copy.
Did you provide a response within 7 days to explain why you disagreed with the report you hadn't seen?
From memory, I don't believe there was 7 days to actually provide a response. I think that by the time I received it, and it was just a couple of days. But we, as per the last line, took their advice to speak to a solicitor ourselves, and we got them to draft a letter to, in response, to try and work out what was actually the basis of what was going on.
All right, and before we come to what happened after this letter, you were also asked to pay the investigative accountant's fees of $9,900 within 7 days.
That's correct.
Do you know whether you did that?
I believe the charge was applied to our overdraft at some stage.
And you referred then to having sought legal advice after getting this letter?
That's correct.
And if we then go to Exhibit 9, CBA.4000.0037.5293, this is a letter back to Gaydens from Lands Legal.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is Lands Legal your lawyers?
Yes.
Or they were your lawyers? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And did they send this letter on your instructions?
Yes, they did.
And you'll see in the letter that they ask for a copy of the investigative accountant's report
That's correct.
and also a copy of the tax invoice.
That's right.
And you've already said you didn't receive a copy of the report. Did you receive a copy of the tax invoice?
No, we didn't.
And can we then go to Exhibit 10, which is CBA.0002.1973.7271? So the other letter that you received from Gaydens was about a termination of the overdraft account.
Yes.
And do you recall what happened with the overdraft account?
To my knowledge, nothing.
All right.
It still existed, and because I said before, our FPOS earnings kept going into the account, and as I said, the charges that BankWest had for the investigative report and also for Gaydens were applied to the same account as well.
Now, at about this time, did you also make a complaint to the Financial Ombudsman Service?
I believe so.
And do you recall that you had contact with BankWest about trying to arrange a meeting?
Yes,
Was this at about this time in November of 2011?
that's correct.
And did the meeting go ahead?
Yes, it did.
And can you remember who attended the meeting?
For our side, there was Andrew Wennebaum from Lands Legal. There was representatives from our accountants, two parties there, and my brother and myself. And for BankWest, there was Matthew Maxwell as their representative. There was a couple of people from Gaydens and a couple of people from PPB Advisory as well.
And do you remember what you were told at the meeting about BankWest's intentions?
Not. The discussion was basically we were trying to ascertain what the investigative report actually showed. And the fact that we didn't receive any information around it, like it just cast a shadow over the whole transparency of what was going on. So they highlighted the fact that there'd been a downturn in trade, which was obviously highlighted at the end of the 2010 quarterly report. But I don't see how else there was information available for them to come up with this situation that we found ourselves in. So basically, they identified there was an issue with the hotel, and we identified that all businesses go through peaks and troughs, and we should be allowed to continue to trade through this.
Can you remember whether by this time you were still paying your principal and interest payments?
To my best of my knowledge, we were.
And you say in paragraph 31 of your statement that after the meeting you remember thinking that BankWest was going to sell you up.
Yes.
Can you just explain what you mean by that and why you thought that?
Well, it was fairly common in the industry that there was a number of receivership sales going on, and BankWest were formed part of that, and we had some in the vicinity of us as well that was going through those situations. I had friends in finance that were talking about not just hospitality but agri-businesses as well, and it just seemed like that we were easy targets in that relation. The fact that, you know, we're high asset businesses but we're low cash flow. So at the end of the day, you know, we have on the back of, you know, things like poker machines which provide, you know, a good capital value in your asset. So, you know, if they were sold, they're going to realise a decent price on the marketplace compared to some other businesses.
So, and I just want to understand or help the Commissioner to understand that. Was it something that was said at the meeting that caused you to think you were going to be sold up, or was it just your sense about the situation not to do with something that was specifically said to you?
Yeah, well, the demeanour, or the way that was portrayed by Matthew Maxwell, it was sort of, I'd even frame it as arrogance, that we, you know, we were genuinely looking to what's gone on in this situation and how we arrived at this point and what's the transparency or the proof and the communication about why we were here. And he wasn't forthcoming in relation to anything that was a positive sort of way out. The fact that when I said that we should be allowed to trade through it, that wasn't going to be an option that was on the table. So again, it's the way we received the communication back to us that made it difficult. I vaguely recall that, you know, that they were trying to push the accountants for a value on the property as well, and because there was no sales, you know, at that time, because the market was fairly soft. Even right back to when we received the second valuation, I think 3 out of the 4 hotels that they used as guides for the valuation were receiver sales. So in country hotels, there wasn't a vibrant market at that stage of things. So the fact that they said our hotel was only worth $250,000, we said that there was something else at play here. Why? How could you value that? And even more, we pressed for how you could come up with that sort of figure.
After the meeting, did you and your brother talk about what you were going to do?
Not that I can recall. We obviously would have, but I can't recall any discussions. It was a high anxiety type thing, like coming down out of it after it, because it was, it wasn't a good feeling to be on someone else's turf and be told that your business is worth $250,000 and we're not going to show you why.
And do you remember whether you were intending to keep trading or try to sell the business?
Yeah, we decided, with that information, we thought that the relationship with the bank was at a point where I don't think it was recoverable. We in the first number of years that we were with BankWest, we didn't have a lot of contact with our relationship manager, but by the same token, we were aware of what was required and all that sort of thing. Basically, the communication, in the sense that, this is what the bank's thinking, this is how we see things in the future, or this is how we can help you, that collaborative type thing that you'd expect from having a relationship with someone that you've got a loan of 1.2 million or whatever it was at that stage. You'd think there'd be a bit more involved, but it wasn't a two-way street. We had to press for, the meeting ourselves and trying to get that information to understand, what really was going on.
And so if we just go back to what I want to understand in terms of what your intention was, after the meeting then, what was your intention in terms of, there's at least two options. One is you keep trading, the other is you look to try to sell the business. There may be others. What did you want to try to do?
We wanted to bring the reports into line to actually show that that situation that happened for financial year 11 was only a glitch in the 5 years that we'd been there. So we instructed the accountants to get the books up to date as quick as we could, and we were going to make a decision from then. But we needed, if we were going to sell anyway, we needed to have that information readily available. We also, over time, contacted a broker to market the hotel. We instructed our solicitor to arrange contracts for sale of the hotel. We'd done the inventories, done all the steps that you'd generally do to bring a hotel to market.
And were those steps you were taking in 2012?
That was, in 2012, some of those steps had happened.
Now, one of the things that we need to put in context is in 2012 you stepped away from being involved in the business.
That's
that
correct.
Right? And that was because you were receiving treatment for leukemia at the time.
That's correct.
And that treatment stopped at some point in time?
It basically, the follow-on from it didn't end till early into the 2013.
Right. And do you recall that the complaint that you'd made to FOS lapsed?
I do.
And then at some point in time you sought to reopen the FOS complaint?
Yeah, we had an issue in trying to get our figures done through the accountants, because they were basically starting from scratch with everything. It was a continual information transfer and that type of thing, and it took longer than I would have anticipated to create a set of accounts and that type of thing. From memory, I think it was still going into 2013. We were still waiting for these figures, so it just delayed everything and caused even more, issue with us.
Was it when you were able to again turn your attention to what was going on in the business that the FOS complaint was re-enlivened, or are they independent?
No, it was, from memory, it was in 2013, and I'd gone through my treatment and recovery. Also, I tried to do what I could in the background, but I was housebound for a fair part of it, so I could only do what I could do in relation to most things.
But once you had re-enlivened the FOS complaint, there was then a telephone conciliation that FOS convened?
Yes, that's correct.
And Do you recall what the outcome of that was?
That we'd have enough time, hopefully, to list the hotel and sell it by, I think, June 2014.
It'd be 30 June 2014.
Sounds fair, yes.
And do you remember whether you tried to sell it going up to 30 June 2014?
Yes. We got to the point where the market was still quite soft. There wasn't a lot of sales in the marketplace. What the general consensus was when we spoke to brokers, and that was that people didn't need to offer money for hotels because if they were distressed assets, they were going to come on the market anyway. So, you know, you had trouble justifying your capitalisation rates and that type of thing. So at the start of the exercise, I think we had a paper valuation from the broker of around 1.2 million. And as we got closer to that point in 2014, you know, we're looking at capitalisation rates of over 20%, which brought it down to in the 900s, which just made it a difficult type of scenario to sell.
Do you know whether the performance of the business had continued to go down during this period?
Look, I can't recall. I remember back to financial year 12, to the best of my knowledge, and things were back to what they were. I think over that period of financial year 11, we had a dip of somewhere around 10%. But back to financial year 12, it was back to what it was before. And so I had confidence that that things were, on the mend as far as things went.
It was still your brother, though, who was managing it day to day?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so in the first half of 2014, when you were trying to sell it, and this was when you were talking about a paper valuation of 1.2 million and then being told on a capitalisation rate of over 20% it's only worth $900,000. I want to just make sure we can understand the way you were looking at it at that point. How much were you looking to try to get out of the sale or to achieve with the sale?
We really just wanted to pay back what we owed the bank. That was as simple as that. There was no other sort of outcome that we would have been comfortable with. But yeah, the realisation came fairly quick once we started looking, seeing where capitalisation rates were actually sitting at that time. So went from like 15% from the previous valuation, which was, 3 or 4 years before, to 20%, basically based on not a lot of sales. So that was the reality.
And do you remember whether in the lead up to June 2014 your brother wanted to sell the hotel or not?
I think that he'd had enough of what had gone on as well. So definitely he was happy to sell. That was our aim of the exercise and going to FOS the second time.
Well, when you say he'd had enough of what?
Oh, the scenario that played out. It takes its toll. You think that you're going okay, and then this is thrown into your business, and you're trying to deal like you're little battlers in a small country pub, and you can't turn things that quickly. You have to work towards increasing turnover, and that it doesn't just happen over a short period of time. It takes 12 months to realise some things, to put plans into action and actually get some traction and move forward with it. So to see all that work that you've done over an extended period just have a rug sort of pulled out from under you, I think it affected him more in that sense than me, even though I was going through a different set of circumstances myself.
And as it got to the end of June 2014, you obviously hadn't managed to get a contract on the hotel?
We had everything ready to go, but we realised we were just going to waste our time.
When you say you had everything ready to go, you didn't have a buyer who was willing to pay what you wanted?
But we had everything in play that we required to do it. So we had a marketing campaign, we had our, through our broker and all that sort of stuff, we had our figures done, we had contract done, inventory done. So we're at that point where you could press a button and move forward in that sense.
And do you remember giving instructions to your accountant to make an offer to the bank?
Yes, so we changed back to our original accountants. So that was our original accountants in Dubbo, and they took up the charge to assist us in trying to come up with a separate resolution.
And if we bring up CBA.0001.0315.6409, so Michael Medway is your accountant, is that right?
That's correct.
And the email address has been entirely blocked out, but the Allison is the person at BankWest that you'd been dealing with.
Yes.
And if we go to the bottom third of the email and blow that up from the words "in light of our position," so the offer that you were making was that you paid $200,000 to the bank by the following Friday. That's the first part. Is that right?
Yes.
And then the second part was a further $100,000 to be deposited 30 days after that.
Yes.
And that was to reduce the principal that was owing.
That's correct.
And it says there the money's coming from, that's your brother, is that right? Your brother's partner.
That's right. Yeah.
And she was going to put up the money in order to reduce the principal debt, is that
Yeah.
right?
She felt strongly enough to do that, that the business was viable.
And then what was requested was that the remainder be refinanced over 15 years.
That's correct.
And if we go over the page to .6410, and then blow up the paragraph in the middle of the page beginning, the two paragraphs beginning the brothers and then the second paragraph. And so one of the things that your accountant was trying to explain was that you thought there'd been some improvement in the performance of the business.
Yes.
And in terms of what was thought about as a strategy, if we then bring down that pop-up and pop up the next part, you'll see what was then being proposed was to try to improve the financial results and then sell it off over 3 to 5 years. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, I'm sorry, I tender that document, Commissioner.
Exhibit 3.107, email Midway to BankWest, 26 June 14, CBA 00010315, 0409, is it, Mr. Hodge?
6409.
6409.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then you received a response to that email the next day. Or I'll just show it to you. CBA.0517.0118.0001.
I think we need numbers again.
CBA.0517.0118.0001. would assist if I said it again, CBA.0517.0118.0001. So this is the response that you received back from BankWest the next day, where the bank said it was unable to accept your proposal
Yes.
and noted that it had already provided numerous concessions to you and your brother,
That's correct.
and pointed out that pursuant to the agreement you'd entered into on the 30th of January, you'd agreed to sell the hotel by auction by 30 June 2014,
That's correct.
and attached a copy of the signed agreement.
I assume that's what was
Oh, I see.
attached.
Well, you can see,
Yeah, I can see the attachments there.
that's right. And then reserved the bank's rights,
Yes.
and then said she would be on leave for the next few weeks, so please contact somebody else at the bank if you had any further queries.
Yes.
Attend to that document, Commissioner.
Email BankWest between BankWest Medway and Stanford and others, 27 June 14, CBA 051701180001, Exhibit 3.108.
Did you sell the hotel by the 30th of June 2014?
No, we didn't.
And after that date passed, did you make a further offer to the bank?
Yes, we did.
And can we bring up RCD.0024.0015.0001? And this is the chain of emails, I think, being forwarded on to you by your accountant, is that right?
Yes.
Mr. Medway is your accountant.
That's correct.
And if we go to the page beginning loan agreement, 0002, and can we bring that page up together with the page which is .0003? So you can see the date of this email from Mr. Medway to Mr. Hornstra at BankWest, which is the 1st of July 2014. Can you make that out down in the bottom half of the first page?
Yeah, I can see it.
And then it sets out what had been sent in the previous email to the other person from BankWest.
Yes.
And then if you go then to the bottom of the page ending .0003, you'll see that a further offer was made, and it explains that you'd managed to secure outside monies of $400,000.
That's correct.
Can you recall where you'd secured those monies from?
That was my brother's partner again.
And again, this was seeking as a first option to try to pay down the capital by $400,000 and then refinance the balance.
That's correct.
And the response from Mr. Hornstra, which is at the top of page .0002, was, in short, we will not engage in a further banking relationship and simply require to be repaid.
Yes.
Should you, however, wish to repay $400,000 before 4 July 2014, the bank may consider a period of 8 weeks to allow you to seek refinance, with the full residual debt being cleared at the end of that period.
Yes.
And I tender that document, Commissioner.
Emails between BankWest Medway and others, 2 July 14, RCD 002400150001, Exhibit 3.109.
You, I take it, didn't pay the $400,000 in order to be able to have an extra 8 weeks to refinance with somebody else?
No, we didn't.
And what did the bank then do?
Oh, I think it was not long after PPB turned up to the hotel again and closed it.
They had been appointed as the receivers, is that right?
That's correct.
Right. And they sold the property?
Yes, I understand they did.
Do you know what they sold it for?
I didn't until well after the event.
Right. What do you understand they sold it for?
I think it was 525,000, including stock.
And they haven't pursued, BankWest hasn't pursued you though for the balance of the debt that you and your brother owe?
No.
And are you able to explain to the Commissioner what was the effect on your brother of the selling of the hotel?
Got to take a break?
Just a short one, thank you.
Yeah, I'll come back at shortly before 3:15. Yes, Mr. Hodge.
I just have a few more questions. I'm just going to ask you again the question I asked you just before the break. What was the effect on your brother of the sale of the hotel?
Yes. Basically, I think from the time this was instigated, I saw him struggle, and even after it all happened, I saw him depressed for a few years. That's why I'm here today, because he couldn't come in. But
Now, you made a public submission
I
to the
did.
Commission,
I did.
and that was how the Commission contacted you after your
That's
public
correct.
submission. And you've already explained why you made the submission.
I did.
I just want to ask you one other thing, which is about the offers that you made at the very end. And what I wanted to suggest to you is that one potential issue for you, if these offers had been accepted, was that if the business performance had gone down rather than up, then the consequence might have been that your brother's partner would have lost the substantial amount of money that she was investing in the business.
That's true. She felt strongly enough about it. Like, she voiced her concerns that that she thought the business was viable. There was opportunity around the area. She worked locally. She was there the whole time. So she had just a good overview as anyone on the opportunity within the region. She wouldn't have made that commitment unless she thought it was a viable option.
I understand that, and what I just want to suggest though is it's possible, one possible outcome of that offer having been accepted by the bank is that you and your brother and your partners could have ended up being worse off than what ended up in the situation that you were.
That is a possibility. Three of us were working elsewhere full time, in good and gainful employment. There was other options that, should that sort of happen, that, we could have been in a different position as well. So I wouldn't say that's categorical.
I don't have any further questions,
Yes,
Commissioner.
thank you. Mr. Sherry?
There's no cross-examination, Commissioner.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Stanford. You may step down. You are excused further attendance.